everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 9 of Vinland Saga Season 2. Ooh! The last several episodes have been really, really good, and it has come to my attention that there is a short released by Mappa, episode 6.5, that I have neglected to watch for the last several episodes. I remember it came out with episode 6, and I was like, I don't know if I want to watch it because I heard it wasn't canon, it was just something Mappa made, and I was like, eh. And so I kind of let it go, and then after episode 7, people were like, oh, you should probably watch it before episode 8. And I was like, okay. And then episode 8 rolled around, and I forgot. So it will probably not make much sense to go with episode 9, but you know what? I was like, better late than never, right? So I've been told I can watch this short, that it should be just correlating with episode 6. It's called Drowning in the Shadow, which I'm interested in. Guessing it's going to relate to Thorfinn. But it's just a little animated short that Mappa put out. Cool. Any extra Vinland Saga content I will be happy for. So we're going to watch that here in a second. I've got my headphones sitting right here. I'm going to watch it just with the sound off for that. So it's not a separate link for whatever. It's not a separate link for the video. But with that being said, I do have some comments I want to talk about before we dive into episode 9. Anita Meyer talked about how in season 1, Thorkel said that it took Thor's one punch to knock him out, right? And I was like, that relates so much to Thorfinn knocking out the retainer with one punch. And so Anita Meyer pointed out that there's like a nice little correlation there that Thor's was a man that could knock you out with one punch, and that's all it took. That's all they had to do, just make their statement and you know them. And I'm like, if Thorfinn's getting to that point with that punch on the retainer, I'm 1,000 times here for it. So I'm like, thank you, Anita Meyer, for pointing that out. That was a really cool parallel. Shinx was talking about how Thorfinn is no longer chronically angry. And I thought the phrase chronically angry is exactly how I wanted to describe Thorfinn in the last several reactions. I kept thinking, how is Thorfinn? Like, Thorfinn, he's feral, he's frustrated, he's emotional, he's angsty, and it's chronically angry. That is exactly how it was. But I like that Shinx says, Thorfinn has gone from a chronically angry kid to a damn fine man. And I was like, yes, I am 1,000 times in agreement with you on that one, Shinx. So thank you. And then Alexander Q brought up a really interesting question, because when we met Thorgal back in episode 7, Thorgal had talked about how Snake had mentored him and like helped raise him. And so Alexander Q was like, how long has Snake been there? Because it seems like from that conversation, Snake's been there quite a while, or has frequently come back. I was thinking like an Askeladd sort of thing where, you know, Askeladd kept going back to his uncle's farm periodically in between missions. Maybe Snake had been hired on periodically over time, or maybe Snake and Sverkel have been hanging out for years just on this farm. Who knows? Sharing wartime stories. Who knows? Right? So that was an interesting question. But also Alexander Q pointed out that everyone with the name Thor in their name in this series so far has had some connection to either battle or loving war or finding glory, either through being obsessed or glorified in battle. So you have Thorkel, who is quite obsessed with battle. You have Thorgol, who is quite obsessed in glorifying it. And then you have Thors himself and Thorfinn, who have been constantly involved in battles, whether or not they glorify or are obsessed with them. That's maybe not the case with them anymore, but it has been the case at some point, right? So I thought that was really interesting. I like that connection. I thought that was pretty cool. Those comments were all really, really nice. So thank you all so much. Before we dive into this short and we talk about it, it's not very long. It's only like 2.5 minutes. Before we dive into this, I want to give a special shout out and thank you to our philanthropy tier on Patreon. Those patrons that support me and my channel, some just join the Discord and we talk about Vinland Saga. Some like to get their videos a week early and support through that means. And then the philanthropy tier are super special because they support me extra when they really don't have to. The added benefits, of course, is getting mentioned in videos like these, but also if I ever have a tie on any poll that we do, they will get to be the tiebreakers. So I want to give a special shout out to our 9 philanthropy tier members at this time as I'm recording. We have Edgar, we have Dana, we have Truck, we have Anime Annie, Larry Manning, Kenny, Tyrone, Shimoyama, as well as Arjo. Thank you all so much for all your continued support. I really greatly appreciate it, and I'm very thankful to have supporters like you helping me to talk about these shows, long-winded as I do, and I really appreciate it. So, all of my love. But yeah, I'm pretty excited. We're going to watch this little short real quick and talk about it before we start the actual episode and see what all happens with it. So as I adjust here. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to look here at Vinland Saga episode 6.5, Drowning in the Shadow. And we're going to check that out here in 3, 2, 1, and let's see this. Oh, you can hear the screams in the distance. And everything. Ooh, the fire's neon, which is kind of cool. It's very dreamlike. Not the horses. Not the horses. Ooh. And then the shadow. Ah, and it's from... Man, it's so weird seeing young Thorfinn in Mappa's design. Crazy. It's been so long since we've seen young Thorfinn. Now here they don't look quite as demonic as they did in the episode. But, oh. With the knives. It's been so long since we've seen him with the knives. And just jumping around doing things. Oh. Oh. Oh my gosh, Mappa. Oh. And just the soft music to it. Oh, with the soft music. Oh, and his head down, just defeated. Why am I stuck having to survive this way? And you can relate this to the OP. Now, he doesn't have to go in the house. He could leave. He doesn't have to go in the house. And the house being in green, being a contrast to the red, that's peaceful. You don't have to go over there. You don't have to do it. And him opening the door. And the knives with the blood. Oh, that's just... Oh, and it's him older. Okay, this is back to episode 8. Yeah. Oh, back to that episode. And they don't show us his face yet. Oh, and they didn't show us his face yet in this. Oh, awesome. Okay. Okay, all right. Okay. Oh, that's great. That is great. All right. So, man, that was back in episode 6 when they premiered that? Okay. That's a nice tie-in to episode 8, actually, because it ties into him seeing Einar. And we don't get to see the kid's face in the doorway now, but in episode 8, he turns around and it's Einar who he sees, and it's Thorfinn being older. Well, how about that, huh? Interesting, y'all. Okay. Yeah, I love so much about that. I love Mappa giving us this. It's not the heavy bombarding battle music, but it's rather soft and somber to contrast with the blood and the gore. And then the idea that there is this separation between the battle in red and the house that's peaceful in green. And there's that color separation, and Thorfinn goes to the peaceful part, bringing the violence with him. So it's almost like Thorfinn believes that he can't integrate into society because he's always going to have that violence within him that he can't shake off. So it kind of connects that idea that Thorfinn doesn't think he's going to be able to integrate into society and be normal like the others, because that battle side of him is always going to follow him. Fascinating. Cool. All right. Well, I've got some coffee with me. I'm ready to go, y'all. Cheers. So we're not going to waste any more time, but I hope y'all are ready for episode 9. When we last left Thorfinn and Einar, they were getting the snot beat out of them. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes. How's that treating them, right? But we're going to start episode 9 of Vinland Saga and just see how it all shakes out. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Oh my gosh. It's like the mangaka from Vinland Saga just said, so symbolism, the episode. What I really love is that everything from this season and the prior season has really led to this point of Thorfinn being at an age and an understanding to get what the deal is about being a warrior. And I wanted to bring up Whiteboard Coon because this episode is surprisingly pretty straightforward. The symbolism is there. The symbolism's like in your face. Here it is. And I guess we can just detail it throughout here, but the symbolism's there. I mean, it is throughout the entire episode. Einar's like, we won the battle. And I'm like, at first I was really afraid that they weren't going to win the war. The retainers were going to go to the master and get them punished. But Ketil's like, Ketil knows what happened. Like, Pater's like, they wrecked their land. And Ketil's like, we're just going to call bygones be bygones. Leave them alone. And then we won't have to worry about this. But the idea of being a true warrior, I love that it's finally spelled out for us in the series. It's like everybody's made these assumptions and guesses of what it could mean. But in this episode, Askeladd of all people come to him. And it's funny because we have the two father figures in Thor's life. In Thorfinn's life, we have Thor's and we have Askeladd coming in. The two sides of the same coin, like we talked about the last couple episodes. And just getting the idea of what makes a true warrior, right? That there's this idea. And what's crazy is that Thorfinn thinking that was Valhalla. Like, Thorfinn, that speaks volumes for Thorfinn's mindset about all of this going in. Because the way they talk in season 1 of Valhalla, it's this heavenly place. Like, you think of the ED and it being like all the angels and stuff. And Thorfinn's like, this looks like Valhalla. Like, he was equating it to hell. Like, equating Vinland. That's interesting. So, equating Thorfinn, we'll put him on here. Thorfinn equating Valhalla in his mind looking like hell, and Vinland to heaven. And this idea that Vinland represents freedom. It represents this freedom and peace, right? Whereas Valhalla, for Thorfinn anyway, represents this endless war, and it's a prison. It's just like you can't escape there. You fall down into this chasm and you can't get out. And so it's curious to see Thorfinn label Valhalla almost like a hellish environment, whereas the other characters in the series have talked about it as the paradise, right? The ultimate goal, right? And that's not really what happens in Thorfinn's vision. But man, can we talk about how jarring that opening was? I felt very out of odds. It felt weird hearing Thorfinn's voice actor be pleasant and have this like jovial tone. It didn't feel right. It felt awkward. It was like, what is happening? And like the moment you see the sheep and stuff and the way that he's drawn with the wide eyes and everything, he looks so much younger. He looks so much more at peace. He looks like happy. It almost looks weird, to be honest. He looks strange the way they've animated him, because it's not like the Thorfinn that's like doom and gloom and angsty and furrowed brow like we've seen, but it's just, this is Thorfinn in his dream where he's just able to sleep on a peaceful hillside under the trees, and he's like, okay, my dad's not dead, I'm not at war, like everything is just so different. And yeah, just seeing him be like, he looks kind of like Olmar there. He's just like, looks like out of sorts. He looks sort of like Olmar, being like, man, it was just a dream. It was scary. Boy, that was scary. He's like, my father had been killed. And my father had been killed. I wandered across battlefields fighting men like monsters. I was like, if this whole series has been a dream, I'm going to chuck my computer. Like, what? But no, it's a dream within a dream. Mm-hmm. And seeing the little lamb, like the innocence. He's like, and in the end, I became a slave. Yeah. And just him seeming so peaceful. Mm-hmm. I'm glad I'm here. I think that speaks volumes, where he's like and he's just got the little smile on his face, like, what? I'm gonna take a shot of that. It's just so, like, what the hell, right? And then we instantly cut with that to him, like, on the ground, beaten up, like, knocked out, saying, it's so peaceful. Mm-hmm. And Einar, meanwhile, is like a beast, right? Einar is a beast fighting. So with Thorfinn, we're going to put him up here. With Thorfinn, the idea that Thorfinn, I think, in his mind, what he wants peace. He wants that peace and tranquility. That's honestly what he wants at this point in his life. Is he wants that, right? And the problem is he's sunk so far into the battle that's not been a possibility. And I did worry a little bit about Einar, Einar starting to get violent, right? But then again, Einar's fought before, so it's not like the first time. And then he won't back down. I love the idea that Einar, he just keeps fighting. And the idea that Askeladd said this is how the real world is. People just fight constantly. And Einar's saying, I'll keep fighting if you keep coming at me. And then that look in his eyes, he says, let's find out if we're beneath you or not. Einar with that gleam in his blue eyes, right? That blue steel. And the guys decide, like, whatever, we're not going to waste our time. You're going to pay for this. You've got a severe punishment coming. And then Einar, I love Einar's tousled hair look where he's like, we won. But it's very hollow, right? Damn. So we go back to the dream that Thorfinn's having with the buttercups and everything. And the episode is called Oath, which again is Thorfinn's oath to not be violent anymore. And he sees his father, and the moment his dad like comes up the hill, it's very much like I kept wondering if we get more shots from the OP and ED in this. We do. We get more shots from the ED in this episode, which is fun. But the sheep coming up, and Thor's looking just so sad and disappointed when he sees his son. And Thorfinn looks so happy seeing his father like climb up the hill. Thorfinn just looks so happy to see him and childish, right? It's so weird, that juxtaposition of him. And I love the imagery of Thor's petting the lamb. Like that's such a symbolic. So let's get into some symbolism here. We'll get into some symbolism here. So as far as symbolism goes, we'll put this on here. As far as symbolism goes, we have the lamb, meaning the innocence, right? And Thor's kind of petting that lamb like he's embracing it, embracing that peace and innocence, right? And he kind of has a stick like he's a shepherd, right? I love that there's the contrast of Thor's with his hair grown out, showing like when he was a father, when Thorfinn was a kid and he'd let his hair grow out. That's what I want Thorfinn to get at. I want him to get to the long hair version. And then we have him when he was younger and it was pulled back, and he looks a lot more like Thorfinn when he was still a warrior. And he's like, Dad, I had this crazy dream. And he's like, I smelled blood. Who did you kill? And then it cuts to him with that knife. And then everything instantly changes. And it goes back to him as a teenager. Yeah, because the knife, we go back. The thing that Thorfinn has been struggling to remember this entire time was the story about the knife. Or at least that's part of it. The knife being only used to protect, not to kill. Because that was Thor's whole thing. He was like, look, you don't need to kill anyone. This weapon is not for you to use to hurt people. It's for you to protect yourself. It's for defense. It's only to be used if you are attacked and you have to defend yourself, but you shouldn't go after others. And then that whole what? And then, God, the fact that he goes back to his dream he had those episodes ago and, like, shows him with the knife through Einar's neck, like, kid Einar, not even adult Einar, but through the child version, like, just showing him, like, killing him there. Oh, my God. And just the cuts from adult happy Thorfinn to teenage Thorfinn to adult Thorfinn stabbing baby Einar to baby Einar becoming adult Einar, like, the transitions were insane. I was like, oh my God, and him dropping the knife. And then it cuts back to that dream and Thorfinn just being traumatized at the fact that he's like the animation of Thorfinn's face when he's holding Einar in his arms. Again, a highly shippable moment. But in the moment, I did not get in the reaction. In the reaction, I was like, Romania, don't think it. But I was like, you know, the shipper in me was like really having it out with Thorfinn holding Einar in his arms as he died. I just died in your arms tonight. Like, yeah, must have been something you said, Thorfinn. But him flipping it over and seeing like the tears. So yeah, the tears, we'll talk about that too. We have the idea of tears and Einar crying. Is the victim in the pit supposed to be Einar? I don't think so. And then the victim's crying. I don't think so. But it's the idea that the victims were crying. Einar cries in that moment that Thorfinn kills him. And Thorfinn, you can kind of relate to the whole fact that since he started the fight with the retainers, part of Thorfinn's subconscious is thinking, I started that fight with the retainers. The one who's going to lose in the long run isn't me, but Einar. They're going to beat Einar up, and it's going to be my fault. I started the fight without thinking of the consequences for others than myself. And just, again, that vision of, you see Thor's in the armor, in the pelts and the coats, and he has his hair pulled back, and he looks so much younger there. And then you have Thorfinn holding Einar in his arms as he's dead. And he says, it was to protect you. The knife was to protect you. Yeah, and it sees him, that strength was for protecting you. And he's not referring only to the knife at this point. Thor's is referring to the idea of this true warrior. Thor's telling Thorfinn that his strength is to protect, not harm others. And there's a defense in that, right? The idea is that he's like, my strength was to protect you and my people, not to go ravage and commit war. He's like, you're strong to protect those you care about, but you shouldn't go looking for battles, right? And this whole sequence, the animation is just like that from the OP. The anguish on Thorfinn's face as he holds Einar in his arms, that anguish is palpable. Like, just the emotions on his face. I felt so bad for Thorfinn in this moment. And he said, I'm sorry, Thorfinn. He said, I still had things to tell you. He's like, I didn't want to die. I had things I needed to tell you, and I couldn't do it. And yeah, this is exactly like from the ED. There was still so much I needed to teach you. And yeah, and Thorfinn shaking his head like, what can you do? Right? Oh God, it's so sad. And he says, no, Father. This was so awful. And he said, it was my fault. And that's when Thorfinn owns up to it. He said, and Thor says, I'm sorry, and Thorfinn says, I did this. That's the thing. Thorfinn owns up to everything in this moment. He said, I'm the one that decided to stay with Askeladd and stay in battle. He's like, it's my fault that I did this. He's like, I didn't go back with Leif. I stayed in the battle. I stayed in the pit, in the chasm. I didn't climb my way back. I didn't try to climb my way back out. That's the thing. There's this idea of the pit of war, and the pit of battle, and the idea of climbing out. That is the real battle, is climbing out. The real battle, as Askeladd will detail it, is, we'll get into the exact wording of it. The real battle is climbing out of that pit, right? We'll go ahead and put that. The real battle is climbing out of the pit, we might as well just put it, carrying the weight of those and I'll just put wronged, carrying the pit of those you've wronged, or in Thorfinn's case, killed. Yeah, the real battle of a true warrior isn't just to continue killing and to keep killing. The real battle of a true warrior is to keep climbing out of the pit and trying to be better than you are, and carrying the weight of your sins, carrying the weight of those you've wronged and killed, and not forgetting, right? That's the thing. You can't forget all of that. You have to keep moving. And Thorfinn, this is huge, him recognizing, I could have climbed out. At any point, I could have climbed out, and I didn't do it. I stayed in the pit, and it just got worse and worse, and the body count got higher and higher, to the point where he doesn't even know how many there's been. And he's like, I'm sorry for leaving you alone. And God, it feels like Lion King, where Simba's calling after his father, like, don't leave. And Thor's is like going away. And then, yeah, I love the idea. I thought it was like a tree branch at first that he slips over, but it's hands, like these rotted, like zombie hands reaching for him and his father to drag them down, right? And then his dad says, you understand now. God, you don't have any enemies. Nobody has any enemies. That's the thing. So the two sides of the coin, right? You have two sides. You have the side that Askeladd talks about. You have that side. And you have the side that Thors talks about. And Thors talks about that there are no enemies. No one has enemies. We make them ourselves. Like if you just live throughout the world, you can go your entire life never making an enemy if you really want to. You really can. There are no enemies. No one has any. And in Askeladd's version, it's a little bit different. Now, I want to wait to get his exact wording in the translation. But Thors is like, you don't have to fight anyone. That's what I was trying to tell you. And God, that look where it's Thorfinn looking up at his dad, like it finally hits him. He gets what his father was trying to tell him. It all makes sense now. He's like, you made the enemies yourself. He's like, you didn't have to do this. And then the hands grabbing him. God, it's the imagery. I would love to see this in the manga. I really would I'd buy the manga volume that has just these chapters alone because it's so good. He said, there's no one who it's okay to hurt. There's no one in that regard. There never was. Yeah, so, and then just the body's like trying to drag both of them down, but Thorfinn gets dragged down and his dad just sits there. And again, his father's killed people too. He just came to that realization that it was wrong and he's atoning for it. But like it's the bodies of the people he killed are amassing around him the same as Thorfinn. But he says it's not okay. It's not okay to hurt anyone. It never was. Like that, you never should have strove for that goal. And then the one grabs the little blade, and we see the blade fall just like it did. Oh, I want to get a picture of that. Just like it did for him when he was getting drug away from season 1, right? And then Thors. Oh man, and the chasm opening up. We do get a little reflection. So we get the reflection of Thorfinn being taken as a slave with the rope around his neck. We get a little glimpse of that, just a tiny glimpse. But it's enough to know, like, and he looks so defeated there that's obviously right after Askeladd's death, right? And so him falling down the pit, and he looks back and sees his dad still standing there. And then, Thorfinn falls, and there's all like it felt like the blinding flashes of light were like when he was getting hit in real time. I can't rewatch the part where his nails get taken off. Sorry. No, that part I was like, bleh. That stuff, nails getting ripped off makes me want to vomit. So I was like, nope, can't do that. Can't watch that, y'all. But again, just the fact that Thorfinn believes that the pit below him, that Valhalla is hell. That idea that Thorfinn thinks that is just like mind-blowing that Thorfinn gets to that point where he thinks it. I'm like, what the heck, man? And it's so well animated, just like all of these, and they all look like soldiers and stuff from season 1. They all look like various soldiers that we've seen fighting in season 1, and this is just like the zombie versions of them fighting endlessly. Because that's kind of, Thorfinn would think it's Valhalla, because the way the Vikings talked about Valhalla, this is pretty much it. It's just them fighting endlessly. This would be Thorkel's paradise, right? The battles never end, and they're laughing, right? And it's so gross. You see like all of them with spears and their eyeballs sticking out and arrows through them. And then you see Bjorn. And Bjorn was like stuck. He's got the knife stuck in him like in season 1. And he's stuck in that prison, right? And then, God, what the best cameo of the season so far has been Askeladd coming back from the grave to haunt Thorfinn as a ghost. Mm-hmm. The ghost life suits Askeladd, right? But Askeladd, what's interesting about this is literally Thorfinn's subconscious and how it views Askeladd as like this jokester mentor kind of figure, which is So fascinating, right? But him just laughing and be like, "It's been a while, Thorfinn. Stuck up there, huh? It's been a bit." And he's got the sword over his shoulder with the blood. The glare, like Mappa. I feel like Mappa fell in love with drawing Askeladd in this episode because they made him look really good, right? They made him look great. But there's Askeladd. He's like, "Hey, it's been a while," which I instantly thought of Attack on Titan. So I was like having Attack on Titan flashbacks. What's interesting about this is you have the concept of Thorfinn. You have him dangling from the ledge, right? Dangling from the ledge above that pit of despair. And then you have Askeladd, who is on the column above everyone. Like he's able to get out of it, right? So it almost feels like Thorfinn views Askeladd as someone who is able to get out of the pit himself. And Askeladd's trying to help Thorfinn do the same. I like that it's like Roman columns. Like it looks like the columns that they saw in Stonehenge that night, right? When they were in season 1 talking to one another before the battle, and there was kind of like the Roman architecture around them. I feel like that's Thorfinn's subconscious connecting that. But also it shows he remembers that moment. He remembers that dialogue between him and Askeladd, which is curious. I didn't think he'd remember it. So kudos. But then yeah. So Thorfinn's like, he's like, "Oh my God, it's Askeladd." And he's like, "You never learn, do you?" And Askeladd, he's like, "You're already back here again." He's like, "Didn't you just leave?" And there's all the columns. And Thorfinn asks if this is Valhalla. And I love that Askeladd laughs at that. He's like, "What?" He's like, "This isn't the afterlife." He's like, "No." He's like, the afterlife is a much nicer place than this." He says, "Look carefully." He says, "This is no different from the world of the living." So yeah, I love that symbolism there. That he says that this is the world of the living is like a living hell. He's like, these men are just like walking zombies. They're no different than corpses walking on this endless battlefield. He's like, this is no different than anything we would see day to day. It just looks a little more stylistic, right? And then I love, he says, "It's where all the shit gets dumped." Mm-hmm. And again, that makes sense with Askeladd's character because Askeladd hated the Vikings and hated the idea of them just battling endlessly. He's like, where all warriors wind up. So the trick is, I love the idea of Askeladd above all of them. Like he's figured out, he's cracked the code, and Thorfinn's hanging on. He says, all warriors wind up in that pit. The question is, are you going to be a true warrior who climbs out of it? A true warrior will climb out of that pit and be able to escape. But are you that? He's like, not everybody gets the chance to do that. It's the purest form of war. And they just mindlessly battle. There is no victory. There is no end. That's the problem, right? And so part of this is in this pit, the idea that there is no victory and no ending. And I feel like that's going to be something that Canute runs into. Because I feel like Canute in season 1 had this mentality of, oh, well, if I take my father's place, if I become king, I can stop the fighting, we can end the war, and go from there. And I feel like what Canute is finding out is, no, the route that you've taken is killing all these people. Now you have to keep track of everything, and you have to keep up. And now that you've taken your father's place, you have to prove yourself to these Vikings whose culture is constant battle. So you think you're just going to stop it? So yeah, I feel like Canute is going to get caught up in the game and fall further into the pit, whereas Thorfinn is climbing his way out of it. It's fascinating. But Askeladd's saying, in this place, everyone besides yourself is your enemy. So Thors was telling him, there are no enemies, only yourself. Yourself is your worst enemy. And here, Askeladd's saying that in the pit of battle, everyone is an enemy but you. So you have two sides of the coin. You either have Thors telling you there are no enemies, only yourself, Or you have Askeladd saying, in this pit of the battle, everyone is an enemy but yourself. And that kind of shows, Thorfinn is in the middle right now, about to transition and be reborn. He's realized the old Thorfinn was very much on this side of the coin, viewing everyone as an enemy except himself. Everyone was in some way, shape, or form a problem. Even Leif. He was like, Askeladd's a problem. Bjorn's a problem. Everyone's trying to stop me from revenge or change my agenda. I'm the only one that's not an enemy. And he wouldn't even go with Leif because he was like, Leif's trying to take me away from my objective. And so the old Thorfinn thought everyone was an enemy. And Thor's is like, no. You're viewing it the wrong way. Nobody's your enemy. You just got to watch after you and what you care about. But you don't have any enemies. Nobody's instantly coming for you, right? And so I feel like Thorfinn is going to straddle right now this line between the two, right? But I think he's leaning more towards realizing what Thors was trying to tell him. He says, if you get stuck in this pit, you're not going to make connections with anyone. You're going to view them as enemies, and you're going to keep killing and killing and killing until there's just no escape, until you're just drowning in blood. And Thorfinn starts to realize the contrast of what Askeladd's saying to what his father was saying. It took him 20-something years to get here, but he's finally making it to that point where he's realizing what the lesson was. And he's like, do you remember, Thorfinn? You used to live here with us. You saw this. And then he's like, for better or worse, you became empty. And we see him like being taken away as a slave. So yeah, that was the thing. For better or worse, you became empty. And you were able to void yourself of all these emotions and make it to where you could crawl out of the pit if you wanted to. He said, and we see the sword, the dagger, the knife fall into the blood, right? And he's like, that's why you were able to escape this place, because you lost all that emotion and you lost all that knowledge and just voided yourself, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. And so, and I like Askeladd in Thorfinn's dream is very self-referential. He says, I'm kind of the one responsible for this, but you're lucky. I love that this Askeladd in Thorfinn's subconscious is so witty. He says, I kind of dragged you here, but you were lucky. Not many men have ever managed to escape. Can we talk about this one scene real quick, though? When he says he's like, you're lucky, Thorfinn. Not many men get the opportunity to start over fresh and escape. And at that moment, we pan over to Bjorn, who's like beating people, and like, he's like, just look at Bjorn. And then it like transfers over from Bjorn's face to Askeladd's, and there's like the softest, most somber look on Askeladd's face, and for a hot second I'm like, mangaka, is this a ship? I feel like there's like a sailing boat across the river of blood. I'm like, is this a ship? We were talking earlier in this season about Bjorn and Askeladd being a ship. This one moment in this episode, I was like, animation team, if you want me to stop shipping, you gotta stop making it so obvious. Because it looks like Askeladd feels bad for Bjorn, because Bjorn could never escape the battle. That's the thing. I feel like in Askeladd's moment here, he's kind of suggesting that if Bjorn could have let it go, if he could have gotten away from the pit, he wouldn't have died. And maybe he laments that. Does this mean, if this is all happening in Thorfinn's head, does this mean that Thorfinn's shipping Bjorn and Askeladd? I feel like it does. I feel like it's like Thorfinn's secret ship. You were filled with the idea of being a warrior, but you were emptied out. So you had a chance to start fresh. He's like, why are you back here? What's inside of you now? And Thorfinn's like, well, damn it. He's like, I had this chance to start over, and what did I do? I punched that man. I used violence against him. And it's funny, we were talking in the comments, we're like, we've been so happy Thorfinn's like been voiding violence and getting away from it, but then we kind of cheer for him when he punched the guy in the last episode. But for me, I was cheering Thorfinn for the fact that he was taking ownership of it and trying to help Einar. But again, that's led him back to this point. And Thorfinn just gets so sad. He's like, my hands are about to give out, and he's like, I'm so close to the edge, and I'm about to fall back into that pit. And I'm so close to doing it. He's like, and I don't know what to do. He's like, I don't want to be back here, but I'm about to be. And then Askeladd goes, me. It's all about you, isn't it? God. It's like, good grief. A little soul searching is all well and good, but keep your eyes open. And that's when he's like, if you don't pay attention, you're not going to notice these giant mountain of, corpses coming up from behind you trying to get at you. So Askeladd's saying, you can do soul searching. You can soul search, but keep your eyes open to what is in front of you. Like, don't get too lost in yourself. Like you can soul search, but don't get too lost in yourself. Keep a mind of your surroundings, right? Otherwise, this giant stack of corpses is going to come and get you. And he's like, shouldn't you lend an ear to their complaints? And he's like, you should recognize some of those faces. And then the scary thing is that Thorfinn, he looks down and sees the corpse like crying. The corpse that's like crying in front of him. I'm like, I don't know if that's supposed to be Einar or what it's supposed to be. But the scary thing is that Thorfinn's like, I don't know these people. He's like, these are people I've killed and I don't recognize them. And at that point, Thorfinn kind of realizes that sanctity of life and its importance to remember. Thorfinn's like, that's why, a true warrior would not outright seek people out to kill them. But if something happened and they had to defend them, they would remember the names of those that have fallen. And so Thorfinn's like, I've gone my entire life slaughtering people and not remembering who they were at all. I just lashed out, like him lashing out at Canute with the cut, him lashing out in the village, him lashing out at Askeladd, like everything. Thorfinn just didn't care. And so now he's like, it's this moment he's realizing how important life is and that these people were human and they've lost their lives and you don't have the propriety to even remember who they were. Like, oh my God, that's just insanity. And Thorfinn, him just starting to cry about it, right? I can't remember where or when I killed you. And Askeladd just looking at him. The stare, like Askeladd's staring at him with those cold eyes. Oh, I've missed him in this series. And it was great seeing him in here being Thorfinn's life coach. I'm just telling him, like get your ass in gear, right? And Thorfinn just saying he's sorry. And of course, Askeladd's like, quit crying the breast milk. Come on. He's just staring at him. And as they're firing arrows, he's like, what an uncouth lot. I like that Askeladd gets onto the ones down below in the pit. He's like, what an uncouth lot. And Askeladd jumps down into the pit for Thorfinn. He jumps down to give Thorfinn a chance to get out. He's like, you don't want to fall back down here, do you? I love that. I love the Askeladd. And again, that goes back to Askeladd dying in the craziest ways. He died to get Thorfinn out. He's like, I gave up my life to help Canute, and in the end, I've given up my life kind of to help you in the oddest of ways. He's like, in my dying breath, I told you to let go of your revenge against me and to move on. Empty it out and start over. He's like, I died to give you this opportunity. Don't squander it. Don't waste it. Crawl back out of this pit and don't come back, is what he's saying. He's like, even if you're hanging off, keep climbing. Climb. Oh, I love that. I love just Askeladd illuminated by the red being like, get out of here and go. I love it. And just Thorfinn with his teary eyes realizing that, yeah, I've got to do this. This is your battle. Your battle is that for the rest of your life, you're probably going to be climbing out of this pit over and over again. But you've been able to climb out of it once before, so you can do it again. He's like, once you've done it once, you can keep doing it. You just can't give up. It's going to be a constant battle, and you may fall down and get near this pit again, but you just got to keep climbing to get out. And it's like, it's so good, y'all. It's so good. And he's like, take the people who you killed with you. He's like, take them with you and fight your true battle. I love it. Become a true warrior, Thorfinn. And that light, that was what his father was saying. Become a true warrior. A true warrior never has to swing a sword. That it's all tying together. It's all tying together, and I freaking love it. And then, yeah, Thorfinn's screaming. And, like, I love the animation of him, like, in the light, climbing his way out. Oh, it's so good. So good. Him just crawling out there with the nails. And then it just stops. And it freezes. And he's got his arms up in the air, like, almost like in reverence. Almost like in prayer. Symbolism. Right? Symbolism. Just him, like, it feels almost like spiritual in that moment. And it ties back to all the night terrors he's had where he's been in the same pose when he's woke up, but now it has a new meaning to it. It's masterful, y'all. It's so well done. And then he sees Einar in front of him, and he remembers a true warrior. And Einar's like, we won the fight. And of course, Einar reveals their real problem as they're walking in the snow. He's like, we've hit rock bottom, the two of us. We're drowning in debt. Our wheat has been ruined, and I'm a mess. But you know, when you hit rock bottom, there's only one way to go from there. Only one way to go up. And he says, on top of that, we'll get punished for getting into that fight. And Einar tries to lighten the mood, you know. Einar tries to lighten the mood by saying, you know, but it was worth it and satisfying to see you punch that guy. And at that point, Thorfinn's like, no, man, it wasn't good. He's like, I'm making an oath. He's like, no. He's like, what's wrong? Are you in pain? And Thorfinn's like, yeah. And he's like, look, I've used these hands to kill so many people. People that were like your family. People whose names I don't even know. And just seeing him shed these big fat tears and just crying, just being like, he's like, what do I do? He's like, I've done so many unspeakable things. It's so sad. And Einar's like, oh crap, man. And then Thorfinn with his cracked hands, he's like, today I struck another person. It's like nothing changed. And he just sits there like, just bless his heart, wiping his tears. He's like, but it ends now. He's like, I love this, where he's like, I'll never hurt anyone again. He's like, I'm swearing off violence. So that's going to be interesting. Him swearing off violence. Because we know there's going to be battles happen, right? So the question is, what do we do with that? If he's swearing off violence, is he just going to defend himself now? Or, I mean, you can knock people out without killing them, without technically hurting them. He can knock people out. You could do that. You can knock them out and that's it. Or, you know, run away. What is the extent of that going to be? Because I think it's good that Thorfinn is swearing off violence. That's good, but easier said than done. I feel like it's easier said than done. I feel like there's gonna be trials, and it's gonna be like it's gonna be a constant battle, right? And that is his battle. His battle as a true warrior is to move forward and try to not use violence unless it's necessary. He's like, I'm going to be reborn. I need to be reborn and start atoning for what I've done. And then at that point, that's when he sees his father. And his father starts to walk away, like from the ED. Like that was what he needed to teach him. Because that's what Thors did. Thor's is like, I decided not to use violence anymore. I was going to atone for what I'd done. And I was going to become a better person. So Thorfinn's realized what his dad was trying to tell him all along. And Thorfinn realizes that in that moment, I'm going to fight my true battle, which is what Thor's was doing up until his death. And yeah, and the whole thing with Thor's was he knocked all those guys off on the ship, but he didn't kill anyone, right? He didn't add to the body count. He spared them all. And so the idea of Thorfinn going through that transition to becoming a warrior that doesn't kill anyone, but like wins battles without killing, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. It's going to be a battle. It's going to be hard. But I'm here for Thorfinn. And I love that Einar's like, I see. All right. And he waits and he goes, I don't get it. But I hear you loud and clear. Einar's a good friend. Einar's like, I don't really get it, but I'm here for you, man. And that's so sweet. I love that. I love it so much. It's like, I can hear you loud and clear. And Thorfinn's like, okay, buddy, old pal. I love them. I love that they're two eyes. They got like one eye each open and they're carrying each other up the hill. He says, and Einar's so huge compared to Thorfinn, but Thorfinn's like, it's all right. I got it. And he says, I'm going to be reborn. I love it. And that's that. And then the retainers, of course, are like, well, it doesn't matter of discipline, blah, blah. And Pater, if you look at Pater, his whole shirt is covered in dirt. Like Pater went out and scoured the earth looking for anything. And they found the button from the one retainer's coat proving that they were there when the farm was wrecked. And Kettle's like, I don't got time for this. I like that Kettle's like, you know what? You guys, if you have this much energy, go do something else, right? He's like, no. And it shows them just tilling back the land, starting from square one. A Trigiv. Where's your coat? That's the retainer. Trigiv. The farm was ravaged by wild boars. There was no fight. And we see the retainers like arguing about everything. That's the story we're going with. And so Kettle's like, I'm glad that's over. And I love Kettle for this part here where Pater's like, thank you. And he's like, you're a strong man, Pater. You're not the slightest bit afraid of being ostracized by those people you work with. Like, I love Kettle gives him like a lot of credit there. And Pater is like, I've been through a lot. After all, I used to be a slave. Like that, Pater himself is going through maybe not a warrior's battle, but something similar where he's like, Pater knows, he's like, it's better not to fight with violence. We'll fight with our brains and we'll figure it out that way. I love Pater for that. That's so good. And then, yeah. And then we have our boys working on that farm. And Thorfinn's like just with the hose and everything. And then my camera shut off right. I hit my desk and my camera shut off right at that moment. But then it was the end credits, right? Oh my God. Such a good episode, y'all. Such a good episode. I am honestly just floored, right? Just floored. So yeah. This was great, y'all. I loved this episode so much. I love that Thorfinn has come to the point where he's finally realized what Thors was trying to tell him, what Askeladd was trying to get him at. It just meeting both ways, taking the lessons he's learned from both Askeladd and Thors and applying it to his situation. And it's going to be a work in progress. Thorfinn's not going to have it all figured out in a day, right? But he's getting help from Spherical. He's getting help from Einar. I was really wanting Einar to be like, to help lift him out of the pit, like in the ED, but I kind of like the fact that Einar isn't there in this episode, that Thorfinn has to do it himself. I do like that. I like that a lot. But man, what a great episode. I loved this. I feel like there's just so much visual representation and symbolism throughout that it was just so well done and animated. And seeing Askeladd again was great. But, oh, y'all. I really enjoyed this episode. I'm very curious to know your thoughts down below. There's so much you could talk about in this episode with the symbolism, with everything, but I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week with episode 10 of Vinland Saga. Bye.